Everybody was just absolutely freaking out today on Breakfast Club when you were going over this, Steve, because everybody goes through it all the time as a loan officer. I don't care if you've been in the business 35 years or 5 weeks.
Man.
We come across deals and we think we've got everything good to go and everything looks great. Then at, some would say the 11th hour, something pops up that was unexpected.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh,
and then suddenly we're in jeopardy of either a delayed closing or maybe even a failed close. And these are tough conversations to have with either way. It's a tough conversation because I think all of us as loan officers, we pride ourselves on being able to close on time, good information. We know what we're talking about. You can trust us. You can trust my pre-approval letter. And then all of a sudden something pops up. We're going to be honest, Steve, sometimes it might be our fault. Sometimes it might be our fault, right? But pretty rare. Usually it's something we didn't foresee happening, something the borrower did, or a condo issue or whatever the case may be. And then we got to deal with it. And then the response with most agents that, is always like, well, why didn't we know this? And so, but you were talking about it on Breakfast Club today, and you have this system called VEI, which is Validate, Educate, and Instruct, and everybody was just like gobbling it up. And I was wondering if on this podcast, you might be able to just touch on it. Of course, not as lengthy as we went over in Breakfast Club today, but maybe you could just kind of touch on that a little bit for anybody who's listening or watching this podcast. And if they want more information, they can reach out to us, So.
Yeah, and this is a great, this is such a, hey, when you were just saying that, I thought about it. You get the call, the underwriter says we have a problem, the pit hits your stomach, and it's like, dude, I got to call the agents. And here's 23 years of doing this. Where Validate, Educate came from? Validate, Educate, and Instruct came from getting tired of just getting beat over the head. I mean, it's because look, the reality is this, and you and I know, we've been doing this a long time. I don't care how good you are. 1 in 20 deals, something is going to happen.
Something's going to happen.
Perfect example. We have one of the guys here in the network, super great guy. This actually came up because of that. I do coaching. You and I do coaching every Tuesday with our guys and girls and our branch managers here inside the network at Success Mortgage Partners, which we get the privilege of leading together. I love it. And so Chris came and he's like, dude, I got bad news. And so every Tuesday we do 30 minutes of just laser coaching. It's like, hey, what came up? What are we doing? What came up? What are we doing? We call it momentum builders coaching.
Yeah, it's really cool.
And so Chris comes in kind of defeated, and it was like, bro, they didn't file their returns. And it was like, oh my gosh, okay. So but then it's like, well, what do I do? It wasn't his fault. At the end of the day, we had it worked out. I mean, he had it approved 1 year tax return. Something changed. The borrower did something. Now it required 2 years. Now it's
got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't even his fault, but guess what? Frank, he gets to call the agent. The agent gets to what? Whop him over the head.
Right.
It's like that whack-a-mole. You remember that?
Yeah, of course.
Fair?
Yeah.
It's like, come back. And so I think I just got tired of getting whack-a-mole, man. It was like, this is dumb. How, it ain't my fault. Sometimes it is, but half the time it's not.
Most time it's not, right?
Yeah,
it's just something happens. Yeah.
So here's what we did was I started realizing this. Whoever says it first wins. And where I got that from, it was so funny. My twin brother's a pastor. He's been pastoring a church for 12 years. And literally when he started the church, Frank, he would put out the church calendar, which was really his family calendar, because we're launching a church together, right? There's 7 of us. We started with 7. Now there's thousands of us.
Yeah.
And so the church calendar, quote unquote, if you're watching on YouTube, hey, by the way, if you're on YouTube or wherever you're at, subscribe, share this with somebody. We don't say that enough, Frank.
Yeah, you're right.
Subscribe, share. We'd love for you to do that. It helps us and get the word out. But in air quotes, he would put the church calendar out, and then Steph and I would have to move our yearly calendar around the church calendar. Right. And about year 3, I got wise to this, and I told Steph, I said, you know what? He puts that out the first week of December. We're doing ours in October, November, and I'm going to send it to him. And you know what I'm going to tell him? Hey, because remember, there's only a handful of us, right? We're launching a church. And I said, hey, bro, man, I want to be a part of everything we're doing. Here's next year's calendar. So if it works for you, build. And so he would.
Yeah, here's our calendar. Yeah.
He'd have to work it around our calendar. And he's my twin brother. He's my best friend. So And what I learned, and I know it sounds silly, but it was whoever calendared it first won.
Mm.
And what I began to realize was, wow, that applies in conversations. See, if I know my conversation with you, Frank, is going to be, you're going to be angry, you're going to be upset, disappointed. Your commission's in jeopardy, which your mortgage payment might be attached to. Like paying your mortgage might be attached to that closing,
Deal
which is
closing,
supposed to
yeah.
happen in 7 days. Your valid frustration and anxiety is real. And so what I realized was this. I'm not waiting for them, and most of them didn't. I mean, I had good relationships, still do, but the ones, typically the lower producers, it hurt the worst because it just didn't have as many deals. So Frank, I started doing this. I needed to validate what I knew they were going to say, feel, or do. I needed to educate them on what we did and why we are where we're currently at. And then I've got to lead the conversation and instruct them on what's the likelihood of closing, what's our next step, what's being done, and how you can expect me to communicate through the rest of this transaction.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Because see, what happens is, if I say it first, hey, listen, Frank, you know, I'll just run it real quick. And I know we can't go as deep. We talk a lot about this in Alliance, and you and I do our coaching here at the network. We go really deep in this kind of stuff, but I think it'll help our listeners. But here's what happens is, hey, Frank, it's Steve. How you doing, brother? It's your Tuesday update. You got a couple of minutes? Yeah, I got a couple of minutes. Hey, listen, I know we're supposed to be closing the Smith file on next Tuesday. Today's Wednesday. Hey, listen, man, something came up today, which is going to put that closing in jeopardy. And I just want to walk through with you. Got a minute? Okay. Hey, listen, if I were sitting there and listen, what are they going to say?
Yeah. Why did we just find out now? Yeah.
Yeah. Why did we just now find out? Like, wasn't the pre-approval solid?
Yeah.
Haven't you had the contract long enough? And I mean, we're talking about literally 6 days away from closing. Is this a dead deal, or is this just a delay? Like,
Right.
You have to say, what's the bad news I'm going to give? What are the questions they're going to ask? Because if you'll take 3 to 5 minutes and just say, oh yeah. And for me, Frank, I wasn't that smart. I just got tired of hearing the same thing. Like mine was, dude, I just heard it over and over and over. I didn't know enough to think through it. I just was like, oh yeah, this is what they always say. And then I just started building a response to it. Take 100% ownership. Hey, listen, if I were sitting in your shoes, I know we got the contract on the 1st. Today is the 12th. We're supposed to be closing on the 20th, but you got to know the dates that you got the contract, because here's the thing. If I go in and I don't know the dates, you may have only had that deal for 7 days and they're still saying, why did it take so long? Or you may have had it 30 days and now you really got to fall on a sword and say, hey, listen, it's 100% my responsibility. We've had it in-house for the last 30 days, and just walk them through the timeline. And so I think it's so important that I got to understand what's the question they're going to ask and then validate it, because when you do it, doesn't mean it takes the emotion out. It just deflates the heightened emotion, the hollering, the screaming, which most of them don't do that. But at least I can come in and just deflate it a little bit. And then here's the other thing I would say too, Frank, and chime in as you see fit. But in the beginning, I fell into the trap of, because we've always had great teams, and it was like, hey, my processor missed this. And, and I used to say things like this, Frank, when the file got to underwriting, the underwriter jumped in and they calculated the depreciating income differently than we did. And now here's what you've done unknowingly. You've now
thrown your team under the bus.
Yeah, you've thrown your team under the bus. So here's what they do is they don't trust you really moving forward.
Right.
But the second thing is, I used to hear from my dear agent friends, they'd be like, Steve, you got to tell me, what the heck is underwriting? Like, all I know is files go there to die.
To die. Yeah.
Like, is there a cemetery there or what? And, I literally would have to spend time just like, I'll never forget talking to Brandon, Frank, and I said, hey, brother, you know what underwriting is? It's an excuse. What do you mean it's an excuse? If the loan officer knows the guidelines up front, all the underwriter's doing is validating the file package they put together. That's it. So if they're saying it died in underwriting, what you're really saying is the loan officer and his team didn't know how to put together a file.
Right.
And
Right.
I don't say that poking at loan officers, because you don't have to know guidelines. I don't know updated guidelines now.
Yeah.
But the reality is we blame underwriting when the reality is the loan officer and the front end team should be putting deals together. So what you've got to do is just say, hey, listen, my team and I, we went through it. We got some verifications back. They didn't line up, created a gap. I'm looking at the likelihood of being able to salvage this deal. Like, I'll give you an example. We looked at the pay stubs. We looked at the W-2s. We looked at the complete loan application. When we got the written verification, there came back variable income. And listen, you know what? I dropped the ball. I didn't realize I should have asked him if his income was variable. He worked 32 hours this week and 38 hours last week and 40 hours the week after that. And was it consistent? I missed it. And I got to tell you, for me, it was the first time I'd seen variable income. But the reality is I can't blame the underwriter. The guidelines didn't change. I missed it. And guess what, Frank? I didn't even know the borrower's name. I didn't know, I'd never seen the file. I had a pre-approval specialist. I had a mortgage expert. I had a loan partner. I had a processor. I had an underwriter. Everybody went through the file. And it wasn't until about 3 to 5 days prior to closing that we literally got a written VOE and variable income popped up. I could have said, everybody missed it. You know what I said? I missed it. At the end of the day, I am the loan officer. And Brandon, I got to tell you, my man, that was a mistake on my part. And that will be a new part of my process, is to ask and verify variable income moving forward. But here's where we're at. I'm looking at the file, and based on the information I have, I'm 85% confident we'll still be able to close. But here's what I know. We're going to at least need 2 or 3 days. Now, I'm going to educate them on what my next step is. So what we're doing right now is 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to need 24 hours to get confirmation. And here's the good news, man. I've got the president of our company who runs our operations on heightened alert. And she and her team know that the minute the information comes in, they're going to review it. And I promise you this, what we're known for is turning 83% of our no's into yeses. And although we ran into an obstacle, she is 85% confident with 1, 2, 3 pieces of information. This deal's still a go. The thing that we know will have to happen is we'll need an extra 3 days extension. So here's what I'm going to do. Today it's 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to text you at 2, and I will call you before 4 with a solution. Are we good? Hey, let me ask you this, Brandon. I'm going to call the buyer. I'm going to make sure they know exactly what's going on. Is there anything that I need to know in that conversation? And here's the other thing. I know calling that listing agent's a tough deal. I want you to know this. I'll be happy to call them. Let me take the sword for the listing agent unless you feel like you need to. Tell me what we're going to do.
I like how you give the buyer agent that option, because sometimes they want to do it. Sometimes they want to take control of that.
So I called the buyer and he's like, oh yeah, no big deal. And he was like, totally, we can adjust the rate. He totally understood. He was shocked he had the rate anyway. I called the buyer's agent that was supposed to be my partner. And you know what she said? She was like, you will close that loan tomorrow and blah, 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 blah. Well, what she didn't know was I had to write a $2,500 check to close it. And I drove an hour and a half to closing to close it. And where the buyer and everybody else would have given me a day, the person who was my partner, who actually happened to be my brother's sister-in-law, refused to close that deal a day late. I wrote a check, I drove an hour and a half, and I paid for a lesson learned. And the reason why I say that is I have no idea what was on the other side of why that loan had to fund that day. You know, and it's like that, and come to find out the financial troubles, it just was.
Yeah, there was a big reason for it.
There's big reasons. And the reason why I say that is, look, that's part of where I came up with the better versus bitter is because then I met this sweet lady, and just give me some latitude. Her name was Jane Caldwell, the sweetest old lady. She's still alive and still doing real estate today. It's still an amazing lady. But she was probably in her 50s, which back then I was like, that's old.
Yeah.
I know that's not old. I'm 48 now. But she gave a 25-year, brand new green loan officer a chance. And when a deal went south, she was like, that's okay, honey. We'll work it out. And so you had this one horrible experience with this agent over here on this end and one precious experience over here. And what I really felt like God was just showing me is, look, You can get better or you can get bitter.
Mm-hmm.
And not all agents are like that. And you don't know what's on the other side of that pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason why I say that is so many times we've given so much bad news where it's like, dude, they're all like that. No, no, no. You have to recognize you don't know what's on the other side of that pain. And for them, they're desperately trying to close deals. So just take the shot. But the better prepared you are, the better you are in taking the shot. Because look, I can deflate any conversation and sure, get upset. If I were in your position, I'd be upset, but I'm not going to get bitter. I'm going to get better at these conversations because I'm going to learn to validate. I'm going to learn to educate, and I'm going to learn to instruct. And the better I get with those, the better I have a chance of earning their trust and confidence. And last thing, when you over communicate in a tough situation, you win partners for life.
Yep.
That's just the facts.
Yep.
Because every agent's had a deal go south, but few agents have a deal where the loan officer truly leads with clarity, without blaming, and giving clear instructions on what's going to be the next step, and then clearly communicating through the process. You do that, you'll win hearts, you'll win deals, and you'll be the loan officer everybody wants to work with. So
yeah, that was good stuff. You know, I one of the things that really stood out to me about it in this conversation on Breakfast Club is how important it is to really have the data, right? To have the documents and the data when you're
Critical.
making that call. And what I mean by that, guys, is if you didn't pick it up, is when you're making this call, you know, inevitably the response is going to be, why are we just finding this out now? Very common, right? Why are we just finding this out now? Well, because, you know, you've had this file for 22 days. Right? Like, why are we just finding out now? And if you don't know the exact dates of everything that exactly transpired so that you can convey that information, totally get what you're saying, right? You know, you guys went into contract on this day. We received the contract on this day. We submitted it into underwriting on this day. You know, on this day we did this, on this day we did that. And now you're laying out the data so they know this is why we're here. Now, it's not just you going, yeah, I know we've had it for 20 days. Sorry. You know, where it looks to them like you've been doing nothing. Like you've just, you got stuff in, you don't know, you guys just don't know what you're doing. All of a sudden, oh my gosh, did you see this? You know, it's like, it's not like that. It's we have to have that information readily handy, you know, when we're making that call, knowing this is the exact timeline, exactly what happened. And this is exactly why we're here today. And it had nothing to do with us sitting around going, oh my God, did anybody just notice this? You know, that's not, because that's what they're thinking, right?
Hey,
they're
well,
thinking,
you know what it overcomes, Frank? Here's what I would hear. They'd say, well, what, like, oh my God, like, what have you guys been doing? Like,
what are you doing?
And here's what I'll never forget. I was like, dude, we crushed this file. What do you mean? What have we been doing? Like, I know the pace that our team has run.
Yeah.
And then I went back and counted the days, and I'm like, we're 7 days in a contract.
Yeah.
Like,
pretty fast to know that you've got something to work on. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's where part of where that came from was, Frank, I would hear that. I'm like, well, what took, and I'm like, dude, we crushed this. And so what we started doing was saying, you never have a conversation where you haven't counted the days. Here's what it'll do. It'll do one of two things. It'll validate you killed it, or it'll expose you didn't.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And if it exposed I didn't, I have to be honest.
Yeah.
And you can't blame. But what we found most of the time for us, Frank, because our process is always the same. You submit in 72 hours.
Yeah.
Like our process, we averaged, like for us, it's unbelievable. I think, what was the number, Frank? I think our average clear to close last month was 18 days from disclosure to clear to close.
Yeah.
So when you have 30-day contracts, Andy gave me the numbers on
I remember,
Friday.
Yeah. We had several that were less than that, too.
It was like 18 days clear to close.
Yeah.
So the reason why that's important is my process doesn't change, whether it's 18 days or 30 days or 45 days. So when I hear what took so long, I'm like, no. My documents and data typically show we are crushing it.
Mm-hmm.
However, I've had a few where it was like, no, we sat on that one too long, man. And I got to tell you, hey, Jane, we sat on it 5 days before it went to underwriting. And listen, I'd love to tell you there was a reason, but at the end of the day, I'm the leader of this team. It's my responsibility. But what I can assure you is this: we're going to solve this problem now. And I'm a process guy. And I believe that processes solve problems. And so we're going to build a process to ensure that another file doesn't sit 5 days, because had we caught this 3 days ago, like it should have been caught,
right.
at least would have been able to get out of the option period.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So, but you see how I just owned all that, but you can't own it if you don't know your days.
You got to
Because
know your
now it's
days.
all it is you took so long and not,
Yeah.
it's the
Yeah.
emotion. I can't fight emotion with emotion. It's emotion
Right.
with data.
You need data. Yeah.
That's it.
Good
That's it,
stuff,
man.
Steve.
What a great conversation. Hey,
Yeah, man, it's
listen,
good.
you one thing I do. Hey, one of the things, and I think about this, part of having the hard conversations, I'd love, if somebody's saying, how do I have an operations team? How do I build a process to where I'm turning no's into yeses? How do I learn more about what you guys are doing at the network, Frank? I think we ought to open it up. If somebody's interested, you and I get the privilege of leading the network, which is where we have loan officers and we have branch managers that plug into this network that we built. It's a community, it's a collaboration, it's coaching. It's something that's so remarkable, that is powered by Success Mortgage Partners. And if somebody wants to learn more about that, because I'll tell you this, the engine you're plugged into makes a difference on how many hard conversations you have.
That's
to have.
absolutely true. It's absolutely true.
Sarah was talking about it today. She happened to say something on Breakfast Club. She's not had a deal that wasn't able to be closed since she's been with us here for a couple of years at Success Mortgage Partners in the network. But you know what the key is? She's had a team go to bat with her on the tough deals and not fight her. And if somebody wants to learn more about that, where would they go, Frank?
Just go to frankcall.com. Frankcall.com. We have a 15-minute conversation. I just had a conversation with a gentleman on Monday,
Yeah,
Steve.
yeah.
I didn't tell this to you, but he asked me, he says, "Oh, so you're originating?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, I'm originating." He said, "But I don't like actually talk to the borrowers or anything like that. I mean, I may have a brief conversation with them just to hand them off to the
Right.
team. The team takes it from there." He goes, "Man," he goes, "that's where I really want to be." I said, "Well, you know what, man, you can do it." I said, "But here's the most important thing. You have to have the closing department solid as a rock first. Like once a deal goes into contract, you have to be able to hand that off to a team and not worry about it. That has to be in place first. If you got that in place first, well, then we can help with the front end stuff, right? We can help figure out, okay, you need a loan partner here, or you need, we can help figure out what the help is that you need on the front end to where you can actually get there. And we have several people in the network that are there, several people that, leads are coming, deals come in, they briefly have a conversation, it's handed off and it's taken care of. Right. And that's where everybody really wants to be. Yeah. And so, but you got to have that strong back end. And that's what we have, the back end, like you were talking about, Andy, and, we're closing, we're clear to close in 14 days, typically, or 18 days, whatever. But you need that in place first. And so, anybody's listening to this, if you don't have that, that's where it begins. That's where it really begins. That has to be established. Because if you don't have that, then it doesn't matter what you're doing on the front end, because you'll always be sucked into the back end. And if you're sucked into the back end, you can't do any more on the front end.
Well, here's the litmus test, and this is a real question. I know we're almost at the end, but how many hours this week have you spent on a file or with a client from contract to close?
Right.
And if it's more than an hour, you're spending time on operations instead of selling.
That's right.
You're doing $25 an hour work versus $500 an hour sales.
That's right.
And the key is this: when you solve that, you make more money. That's just the facts and the truth. You get more freedom. You love what you do more.
Totally. All right, man.
Let's get out of here, Steve. Great conversation, man. All right, brother.
All right, have a good one. Adios.